Anyway, good morning. Thank you for coming to the Developer Summit. I was going to talk a little bit about the state of the Xen project to open it, and then we'll have the roadmap updates and all the talks afterwards. But first of all, I wanted to thank our sponsors for sponsoring the event. It's relatively new for us that we actually have sponsors sponsoring, our events. So Citrix is sponsoring Bitdefender and ARM as well. I want to point out in particular that Bitdefender is also hosting and sponsoring the party tonight. I'll explain in a moment, where you find stuff and so on after that. So first, a little bit of organizational stuff. So I come in. Like usual, we have BOFs. We kept a couple of BOF slots free. The BOF room is just across, sort of diagonally from that room. All the signage is probably wrong because I had it changed from where they put it originally, which is on the other side of the event. But if you still want to host a BOF, come to me, find the pen, and then write the title onto the poster on the outside of the door. Then another organizational thing. So lunch is not provided as part of the event, but there's lots of events, lots of venues within, 250 meters from here. The Linux Foundation actually printed out a list of venues nearby. I will get those shortly. So come to me, and then just before lunch, and we can hand out the locations where you can find lunch. Evening party. So that's relatively close. So I put a map here. So it's basically just from here over that little park, and we should probably, all walk together. There's dinner provided, and thank you again to Bitdefender for paying for the party. And we also have the developer meeting on Wednesday morning. If you're still around or you haven't signed up yet, there's space for about 30 people. Just go to that wiki page and add your name, or find me afterwards, and then I can add your name as well. But it'll be first, come first serve basis. So when we're full, we're full. So now to the real meat of the talk. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what the impact of moving Xen to the Linux Foundation was. Cover a few success stories, because there's quite a few. Which we've made tremendous progress in a lot of areas in the last year. However, that's also causing us some challenges. And I set up a BOF where we can just, where everybody can come and raise their issues, and we can discuss maybe how we can solve some of these challenges, and then some of the things which are coming next. So I wanted to look back at what was the impact, of moving to the Linux Foundation. And I don't know whether you know, that's the Shard in London. It's 1,004 foot tall. So I thought, 1,004 foot view of what that impact was. Well, by design, the developer community fundamentally has been pretty much unaffected by that move, except for the growth which has come from that, and that's also where we have some of the challenges. And I'll have some rather interesting data and stats to share on these. We added an extra layer of governance, and that really hugely increased the visibility of the project, because we've gotten a lot better at marketing, at PR, and a lot of those things. We also have funds to solve common goods problems like test infrastructure. And we've been spending a lot of time developing the messaging around the project. You know, why is Xen great, and so on and so forth. The impact on me personally was, you know, I used to have 100% of my time was spent on you guys, on the developers, and now I only have about half of, you know, the time to really look after you, and then the rest I deal with media and messaging and marketing and so on and so forth. And it might also be a good, you know, topic at that BOF this afternoon, to see whether that actually works for you. Another thing which was a direct consequence of moving to the Linux Foundation and creating the Xen Project Advisory Board was really that it's created links into the management of organizations within the developer community. And that's led to improved relationships, you know, more collaboration. An example of that is specifically at, you know, Linux events and other events. You know, I used to be the only one who went out there to give Xen project talks, you know, with maybe some of the other Citrix folks, but that's become a lot more diverse. You know, so Conrad, for example, is giving a talk at Cloud Open. Intel is giving talks. You know, a lot of other vendors are giving talks about Xen, and I'm quite pleased about that. So, you know, fundamentally, what's happening is that marketing is really becoming a shared activity, you know, which is shared by everybody in the community. And it's a good thing, and that's how it really should be. And I think there'll be more progress on that going forward. And we have the user community, you know, engaging more. You know, so there's more blog posts from different people on the Xen blog, but also a lot of other, you know, personal blogs and so on. And people who used to be engaged in a community and then disappeared have come back. Another thing which, you know, Russell can tell you about also is that the Q&A system suddenly has become very busy compared to the mailing lists. And, you know, there are lots of other, you know, positive things going on. So, who knows how the governance of the Xen project works? Nobody, okay? All right, so that's what I thought. So I put, so I kind of wanted to remind you a little bit about the top-level structure, right? So what we used to have is really what I call the project governance. And that's, you know, that we had before the Xen project was created and moved to the Linux Foundation. It deals with things like, you know, the values in the community, such as it's a meritocracy, you know, everybody has the same rights. It's about the roles, you know, committers, maintainers, contributors, release managers, and so on. How we make decisions, how we create new projects. And, you know, if you're interested in that side a little bit more, just Google Xen governance and you'll find that document, right? And then it's also about things like community initiatives, best practices, and so on, like test days. Test days have actually been quite good, you know, for us as well. Documentation days are working quite reasonably, and, you know, and we're thinking about other things as well. And then on the left hand, you know, we have the advisory board. So who knows, you know, raise your hand if you know whether your company has somebody on the advisory board. Yes, there's quite a few, right? So what does the advisory board really do, right? So, well, we're looking at PR, AR, that's analyst relations, marketing and messaging in general, things like trademarks, membership rules, and dealing with legal issues. All stuff, you know, you guys really don't want to have to deal with. But we also have funds, you know, to solve problems in the community. You know, for example, some of the funds for this event came out of the project budget, and we're building an independently hosted test infrastructure, which Don, who sits down here, he's leading that working group. And that leads me to the next point, really. So, when we set this up, there were really those two worlds, and actually one of the things which transpired is that we needed to have a bridge, between the community and the advisory boards. And the way how we do that is through working groups. So for example, we have it's called the Test Framework Working Group, but it didn't fit on there, so I call it the Test Working Group. And we have some community representatives on there and representatives from the companies who sponsor the project. We're also setting up a PR working group, same thing. There's community spokespeople. We have a press person which works for the project, which is funded by the advisory board, and me and and members of various companies working together on moving the messaging forward and basically selling the benefits of the project to the wider world. And then we have the technical coordination team, which we had before. That's basically a group of companies and individuals who are distinguished within the community, and they come together once a month and discuss the bigger problems and try and solve them, like bigger technical problems or bigger roadmap items. So a recent example where there was a lot of activity was around new virtualization modes or ARM support, those kind of things. Anyway, so I wanted to kind of put a bit of meat in and explain to you what the advisory board does. So when I took on the chairmanship, we basically came up with a plan, and this is the sort of top-level slide of it, right? So the idea is, for the board to secure the long-term success of the project, and we're doing this, by driving momentum within the sub-projects and adding new projects to the to our family of sub-projects as well. And then we had a couple of primary goals. One was around media coverage. Another one was around growing the developer community. But then also, because member companies are paying money, to support the community, they need to get something out of that as well. And then a set of secondary goals were really around expanding involvement of the user community and also growing the ecosystem. And we're actually doing quite okay on a lot of them. And I'm not going to bore you with the with the ones on the right. We're going to focus on the green bits when we talk about the successes within the project. And I kind of just wanted to sort of throw up what budget we really have and where we're spending this. And you'll see that test infrastructure is quite a big one there. And at the board meeting on Wednesday, we're going to sign off, hopefully, and then we're going to have an independently hosted test farm for the Xen project somewhere in the next few months after that. So we have everything in place, like we organized a colo, we have a list of machines, which we're going to order, we have somebody who's going to support the infrastructure and keep it running. So I wanted to look back at the last 12 months, and give you a few numbers to see how we're doing. So the one which is really most interesting is around media coverage. So there's a metric called unique media clips. And if you look at that, before we joined the Linux Foundation, we used to have about maybe 20, 30 press mentions a quarter. Then we joined the Linux Foundation. There was a lot of buzz around it. And we had around 400 press mentions a quarter. And it leveled off a little bit. And then in Q1, the project hired Sarah to really, sell the story of the project. And if you look at this now, we've made a huge impact in terms of media coverage. And in July, alone, that's quite significant, right? And not all of this comes from Sarah. A lot of different vendors are just starting to write stories about Xen. And that's really interesting, because fundamentally, that drives interest in a project, that drives user adoption, and it also brings new contributors to the community. So if I look at the whole thing in a slightly different way, right? So actually website traffic and social media coverage has increased. So, the average monthly web visits to our web real estate has increased by, 30% in the last 12 years. And, 12 months, not years, sorry. We haven't been around that long. Social media following grow by nearly 50%, and the trend of that is really increasing, right? Then I wanted to also look at, commits. So these stats here show commits and contributors across all 4, projects. Now the commits are a little bit strange because, different projects tend to have different size of commits, so that's probably not a good metric. But the metric below is actually quite interesting because that shows the participation, by individuals, and that's sort of clearly growing across all projects. There's a few projects which have been leveling off a little bit, like PVOps and XAPI recently as well, but that's been picked up by activity in the hypervisor and in Mirage OS as well. So we do actually also have a dashboard. There's a link down there at the bottom. You can cut through the data in a lot of different ways. You can zoom into the various vendors. There's still some bugs in it, so if you use it, just use it with care, right? Particularly around the vendor mapping, it's not quite right, because you actually have to supply email to vendor mapping to really make that work. But we've made a lot of progress there. If we look at the hypervisor, it's also quite visible that we've grown, right? So the commits per month are going up if you look at it on an annual basis. So that was almost 33% more than in the same period last year. You're also seeing that the amount of contributors who contribute to the project every month is going up. And then down on the left, you see the mailing list traffic, which is also going up a lot. And it's starting to cause pain to quite a few of you in here. And it's also starting to act as a barrier for new people who want to engage because they just get scared by the amount of traffic. I covered that. Here we go. We improved quality quite a bit, right? So around this time last year, we signed up Xen to Coverity Scan. And in the last 12 months, basically the issue density, that's the amount of issues Coverity throws up, has decreased from 1.01 to 2/3, well, 0.66, and we fixed nearly 1,000 issues and identified around 300 as non-issues. And if you put that in context, right? So Linux in the last year, also improved. So we're just a little bit worse than Linux. I have last year's KVM figures, but I don't have this year's KVM figures. So we're doing a bit better on quality than KVM does, which is kind of great. And a lot more tests have also been developed. So thank you, to everyone who's developed tests and submitted them to the community. So who actually has been writing tests? Raise your... Nobody? Ah, yeah. All right. Well, maybe we can do a bit more then, if there's only 2 people who actually wrote tests. But you made a great impact. So we have new sub-projects. So we have a new Windows PV driver project, which has been approved. That's been led by David Durant. Oh, Paul. Oh, sorry. I'm going to fix this. And we have an embedded and automotive project, which is actually being kicked off today and led by Global Logic. And there's, for example, a press release, being pushed out today. And, I had to answer lots of questions to journalists on the weekend instead of having fun here in Chicago. And I think generally, the sub-project model really works. Mirage OS is picking up. Oh, lift the projector up. I don't have the projector, so I don't. That's too high. Cool. All right. Oh yeah, because you see just somebody else's head, right? And you know the PVOps and Xen on ARM really, you know, they started to achieve their initial goals. We got into Google Summer of Code, and we have OPW students, well, interns, sorry. And we had 7 participants. I think 3 of them from this year are here. And then we have, I also saw a few from last year. So raise your hands if you're on OPW and Google Summer of Code. It's 1, 2, must be 2. Where did the rest go? I had dinner with you yesterday. There's some missing. Anyway, don't be shy. And we also have good mentors, right? And yeah, if you're willing to mentor, you know, more students or interns in the future, come to me or, you know, one of the existing mentors, and we actually can help you to tell you what's involved in that. I think it's very, very rewarding to do that. The 4.5 release, we'll hear about that a little bit later. I think it's going to shape up to be the most feature-rich release ever, if we can actually get all the code in, which is currently being reviewed. And you'll hear a little bit later from Conrad about this. But that kind of leads us to some of the challenges, right? So one of the ones where we're struggling with is code reviews. And so I did a bit of data crunching here. So this shows you a histogram of the average time it's taken from July to January last year to get patches in, and in February to beginning of August. And what you see is that actually it's taking longer, you know, to get our patches reviewed. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg, because I have no real way of measuring. I can only measure patches who actually made it into the code line from when they were posted first onto the mailing list. I can't actually measure how big the backlog is. There's no easy way of doing this. But you know, if you look at the figures, the average review time per patch increased by 4 days. That may not sound like much, but if you take that with our current commit rate of around 2,500 patches a year, right, that amounts to an extra wait time of 27 years, right? You know, so that's quite significant. Pardon? Yeah, but we are actually reviewing a lot of stuff, right? So, you know, so I suppose, you know, like generally, it might, you know, I just wanted to put this figure in a space to scare you a little bit, and and maybe get you guys to think about how we can, you know, how we can get more reviewers. Xen Devel traffic is growing. So in the last 12 months, the monthly average of postings has doubled, right? And I've been thinking about this. So I really don't want to split Xen Devel into lots of smaller lists, because we're going to fragment the community if we do that. So Stefano actually had a great idea. What we could do is basically do something like the kernel does, where we have, you know, maybe several lists for bits of the community, but we keep Xen Devel where we have everything, and then we always see like Xen Devel and then, you know, maybe a functional area. And that gives you the choice to either look at your piece or to follow, you know, everything. But I want to discuss that at the BOF later this afternoon. I think we're also struggling, not struggling, but I'm not quite sure what we want to get out of the summits, right? So what we started to do is switch the summits between Europe and the US. And unfortunately, you know, if we do this with LinuxCon, And we're going to end up with an odd cycle where the event isn't every 12 months because, you know, the US Linux cons are always in summer, and the European Linux cons are always in, you know, well, beginning of winter fundamentally, and then we end up with 9 months in between and 15 months in between the summits, and that means, like, you know, we have a small summit and a big summit where we have lots of stuff to talk about. Also, last year we started to split the summits for the first time into a developer and user summit, right? And the idea there was, well, you know, the consequence of that is that the developer summits are smaller. We used to have more people, but because now we're focusing only on developer content, of course, you know, it's basically mainly developers there. And I'm not sure whether that's the right thing to do. So we need to think about that, right? So I think there's different opinions here in this room. But I do want to ask the question, and maybe we can discuss that at the BOF as well. So, you know, running a BOF this afternoon, and a couple of other challenges. There's quite a few companies trying to hire people with Xen skills. I think Conrad is hiring a few. ARM might be hiring a few people. There might be some others as well. And really, those companies finding it difficult to find people with Xen skills. But then maybe actually we just need to look for Linux skills and you know, and train up people. And you know, initiatives like OPW and Google Summer of Code are helping here too. Of course, another thing is we need to translate the media momentum into new users, right? So we're making a lot of noise, we're getting a lot of coverage, and it means that, you know, it's actually important that the first experience for new users is good, which means, you know, we need good documentation, it needs to be easy to use Xen, we need, you know, we maybe need better distro integration. So what's next? Well, I already covered the independently hosted test infrastructure, so we source the suppliers, the budget proposal is in place, and we can get started on that pretty soon. I think we have like, how many machines are we going to order initially? Do you remember? 26. Yes. You know, that's double the, right now we have 12 or so. So that also means that the throughput of the test infrastructure that we have now will be increased, and we can do more things. And you know, we're also doing more around crystallizing why Xen is great. So there's been a lot of progress there, and I'm spending quite a bit of time on having our first analyst meeting run from the project as well, which should be interesting, and then we can sell the benefits of Xen to analysts as well. And really, that's it. I'm just about on time, but because we started late. But fire off with a couple of questions if you want. Just go ahead. Any questions? No questions? They bore you to death? No? Pardon? Oh, yeah, I can relax now. All right, so who's next? It's George, I think. So thank you.